We'd read at the end of the parsha how after Moshe Rabbeinu had come and presented the miracles to prove that he is God's agent, he's the Redeemer, the Torah tells us the people believed. And because they believed, immediately there was a work stoppage. Paro immediately understands how to deal with people trying to have a work stoppage. He immediately gives the order, and he says, until now we've been supplying the straw to make the bricks, and we demanded quotas, but now we demand the same quotas, and they have to supply the straw themselves. They have to go gather the straw, and we will demand the same quotas. And if they don't meet the quotas, they'll be beaten. The overseers of the Jewish people, who were Jews themselves, come to Paro and they complain, and they say to Paro, we're not going to survive this. How do you expect us to meet these quotas? So he says, you people are lazy. You have too much time on your hands. And they use the word nirpim atem nirpim. You're not giving your fullest. Why? Because if you have time to think about wanting to leave, that's an indication that you're not fully occupied. Because if you'd be meeting your maximum, you wouldn't complain. Therefore, I'm withdrawing the straw subsidy, and I'm going to demand the same quota. That's last week's reading. And this is Paro explaining to the Shotrim, to the Jewish overseers, because if the Jews did not deliver the quota, the Jewish overseers were beaten. As Rashi explains, there were Noksim and there were Shotrim. The Shotrim literally means the policemen were Jewish, were Jews. The Noksim, the taskmasters, were non-Jews. And the one who would have to deliver the quotas would be the Jewish overseers. And if the Jewish overseers who oversaw Jews working, the laborers, did not bring in the quotas, they would beat the Shotrim, the overseers. The taskmasters would beat the Jewish overseers. So as they're coming out, hearing why the straw subsidy was withdrawn, they meet Moshe and Aaron going into Paro. And two of these overseers were Dosan and Aviram. And they say to Moshe and Aaron that since you've come, you've made our position putrid in the eyes of Paro. We've become detestable. And therefore, that's why we're being mistreated. It's all your fault. Meaning, it was a frontal attack to Moshe and Aaron by Dosan and Aviram. Moshe immediately, when he comes out of Paro, he goes to Hashem, and he says to God, Lama hareusa lama zeh shlachtoni. Why have you made it so difficult for this people? Meaning, since we've come, before we came, it wasn't as difficult. Now that we've come, and the Gula is supposed to begin, you've made it more difficult. Lama hareusa lama zeh shlachtoni. So Rashi cites the Midrash. Hashem says, it's not your concern. It's not for you to know. He says to Hashem, if that's the case, why did you appoint me to be your agent? If you're keeping me in the dark. So Hashem says to Moshe, Atotira, now you will see. So the inference of now you will see the redemption. But the Jews going into the promised land, into Canaan, that you will not see. Because your question is due to a lack of faith, a lack of trust. If you trusted me, you wouldn't have asked that question. But because you did ask the question, it was lack of faith. And because of the lack of faith, you will see this redemption, but the entry into the land you will not see. Now the question is, how does Moshe ask such a question? What precipitated that question? It was that frontal attack by Dosan Aviram that they accuse them that all the suffering of the Jews at this moment is due to your coming. I'm just explaining to you what the Midrash says. Because they were so rattled, Moshe was so like taken off guard and so rattled by this accusation, immediately his reaction was to Hashem, so why did you bring such pain on the people? Because they expressed it, we're in pain. You've made us detestable, putrid in the eyes of Paro, and therefore we're suffering to this point. So because it was like such a unexpected attack, Moshe Rabbeinu reacted by saying to Hashem, Lo meros lo mazeh shlachtoni. And therefore God's response was, because you've spoken this way, you will not merit seeing the promised land. That was the big give and take. So there's a number of questions. Firstly, why did things have to first get worse before they got better? If this is Geula, this is redemption, things should have gotten better immediately. But things had to get worse before they got better. And they did. Right after this withdrawal of the straw subsidy, soon afterwards, the bondage stopped. The Jews were no longer subject to the physical bondage because the plague started. Moshe goes to Paro and says, if you don't send out my people, God's people, all the water in Egypt is going to turn to blood. Once the Makos began, the Jews were not physically bound to any of the chores as slaves. They were still equivalent being incarcerated in Egypt. But in terms of the actual workload, they didn't have the workload any longer. This is Chazal. But initially, things had to get worse before they got better. Now, so there's a famous Orach Chaim I always mention, that why do things have to get worse before they get better? So he explains, the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, that the way God created this world, for instance, the seasons, the Gemara tells us that the end of winter is the coldest part of the winter. The end of summer is the hottest part of the summer. Why? So he explains, because whenever there's transition, the transitions from one state to another state, before the transition fully transfers over, there's a resistance to that change. That's the way God created this world. And therefore, that resistance creates an intensity, and that intensity causes that whatever state exists becomes intensified. Therefore, the end of winter is colder, and the end of summer is hotter. Now there's a transition from Shibu to Geula. We're going from bondage to freedom. The Jews, for 210 years, are in a state of bondage. From the time the plagues began, after the 10th plague, each plague was a month. 10 months later, they're leaving Egypt. So right now, the process of going from bondage to Geula is beginning. Because that process is a transition from one state to another state, which these two states of existence are totally different, they have to be extricated from one into the other. That extrication causes the resistance. Therefore, the bondage has to intensify before it lets go. That's why the straw subsidy was withdrawn, because that's an intensification of the bondage. When the plague started, this is gradually, the Geula is starting to be released, which culminated with the 10th plague, which was the killing of the firstborn. And then we were driven out of Egypt. That's the Orach Chaim HaKodesh. And God explained it to him. He explained it to Moshe. So if that's the case, I mean, it's a good question. You know, we all want to learn. It says, "Ina baishin lomed." A person who's shy can't learn. He asked the valid question. But it's the way he asked the question. As I said, what caused the question? If he would have seen this, Moshe could say to Hashem, could you explain me what's going on? Not a problem. Explain it. Explain to me the process. But it's it was a reaction to the frontal attack by Dosan Aviram. It's like they shared their pain with him, and the accusation of him was, you're the culprit and you're the cause of our pain. And so the basis for the reaction was that accusation. So it's interesting. Dosan Aviram were such bad people. They were able to touch a nerve in Moshe and Klal Yisrael in a way nobody else was able to touch such a raw nerve. Initially, after Moshe killed the Egyptian, these two people inform Moshe. Literally, they behave without conscience. No conscience, no shame. How do you inform on a fellow Jew? And right away, the Torah tells us immediately, Paro wanted to kill him. And he was only able to escape miraculously from Egypt. His second son was named Eliezer. Why? Elokei Ovi Bezri ve'atzilei micherev Paro. He named his second son Eliezer because God came to my aid and I was saved from the sword of Paro. He would have been killed otherwise. I mean, how do two Jews go and inform on a fellow Jew? That's firstly. Secondly, the only advocate the Jews had in the palace was Moshe. The Jews knew that Moshe was a Jew, and he was the favored grandson of Paro. So how do you go and put the Jews in jeopardy or make things more precarious by going and informing on Moshe? They lived without conscience, these two, as we'll see later in terms of their behavior. So when these two people, they go and they attack Moshe, the reason, there's nothing wrong with the question, but the question is, why did you ask the question? The pain. He felt that pain because it was the accusation, and the word they use, hivashtem reichenu. You've caused us, the word hivashtem means to become putrid. Literally the word to stink. We stink in the eyes of Paro because of what you've done to us. I had said, we say, Keshim shevorchan al tov, kach mevorchan al ra. We say that as once is a blessing when good fortune comes upon a person, one acknowledges Hashem when, God forbid, tragedy comes on a person, misfortune. Once is dainu emes. Chazal legislated the bracha to acknowledge that Hashem is the true judge. What's the reason why? Dainu emes. Factually, Hashem is Hatzur Tomid Polo. Whatever he does, we may not understand why, but everything that he does is fully equitable. Tzadik v'yosheru. Everything is measured and exact, and it's with the ultimate level of fairness. We may not understand, but he's dainu emes. The moment, God forbid, a tragedy comes upon a Jew, the first thing he's supposed to say is classify what is that. Hashem's dainu emes. Because if a person asks the question, it doesn't make sense why. God forbid, you're questioning Hashem. You're questioning God. Chazal say, the moment tragedy, you hear tragedy, it could even be somebody else's tragedy. Once it's dainu emes. You have to acknowledge that although we don't understand, it's equitable. And the reason why we don't relate to it is because it's beyond our capacity. That's the acknowledgement. But if a Jew would say, it doesn't make sense, why? It actually could activate prosecution. You're questioning God. No, but you don't question God. Moshe, when he came, it wasn't, could you explain to me the process? Why do things have to get worse before they get better? It was a reaction to Dosan Aviram says, we become putrid in the eyes of Paro. That's the cause of why this happened.